What if I told you that the city of skyscrapers, the capital of the world, was once a city you could walk across in an afternoon, and that buried beneath the asphalt and steel of modern Manhattan lies a ghost, a lost city of hills, streams, and farmland that vanished almost without a trace? Today, we are not just going to look at old drawings, we are going to dismantle the myth and rebuild New York from the ground up, as it was in 1800. By the end of this video, you will never look at a New York City street the same way again. To understand New York in 1800, you have to first forget everything you know. Forget the Empire State Building. Forget Times Square. In 1800, the entire population of the city fit into what is today just the financial district. We are talking about a bustling but tiny port town of just 60,000 people. The rest of the island from present-day Chambers Street all the way up to Harlem was a pastoral landscape of rolling hills, farms, and dense forests. But here is the paradox. Even though it was small, it was already the most important city in the young United States. Why? Because of the water. Look at a map of the eastern seaboard. New York had the best natural harbor on the continent. It was deep, it was sheltered, and it connected to the interior of the continent via the Hudson River. This geographic accident was its destiny. But in 1800, that destiny was just a whisper. The city was a powder keg of potential, but the fuse hadn't been lit yet. Now, let's take a walk. Imagine you are standing at the foot of Wall Street, but it isn't a canyon of glass and steel. It is a real wall, or at least, the remnants of one. The wall that gave the street its name, built by the Dutch in the 1600s. To keep out the British and the Native Americans, was long gone, but the name stuck. To your left, you would see the bulk of Trinity Church, not the grand neo-Gothic cathedral you see today, but a simpler, shorter structure. And to your right, the East River, glistening and clean, lined with wooden docks, bristling with the masts of merchant ships. This was the economic engine. Ships from England, from the Caribbean, from China, all unloading their cargo. The smell would have been intense, a mix of sea salt, horse manure, and the pungent odor of curing tobacco and raw sugar. It was a working city, loud and dirty. The streets were mostly unpaved. When it rained, Broadway, the city's grandest avenue, turned into a river of mud. But here is where the first buccal abierto snaps shut. We think of the city grid as ancient, but in 1800, the famous street grid didn't exist yet. The city was still medieval in its layout. Streets curved, they dead-ended, they followed the paths of old cow paths and Native American trails. It was chaotic. And that chaos was about to be erased by the most ambitious urban planning project in American history. The grid was coming. Let's go north, past the city limits. The boundary of the city was marked by a barrier meant to stop disease in British soldiers. It was called the Collect, or the Freshwater Pond. Today it is the grimy neighborhood of Chinatown and Civic Center. But back then it was a massive 50-foot deep freshwater lake. Yes, Manhattan had a lake. It was a picturesque spot, surrounded by hills, where New Yorkers would ice skate in the winter. But by 1800 it was already becoming a health hazard. Tanneries and slaughterhouses on its banks were dumping waste into it, turning a natural wonder into a toxic swamp. The solution: they didn't clean it, they buried it. Over the next 2 decades, they literally leveled hills to fill in the lake. The streets you walk on today in that area are built on top of a landfill that covers a buried lake. The water is still there, seeping in the basements of buildings, a ghost beneath the pavement. This instinct to conquer nature by burying it or leveling it was the defining characteristic of New York in this era. The land itself was an obstacle. The island was not flat. It was ribbed with steep hills and rocky outcroppings. One of the most famous was Bayard's Mount, a hill that stood about where the intersection of Grand and Center Street is today. It was the highest point on the lower island, and the British had used it as a fort during the Revolution. In 1800 it was a picnic spot. By 1810 it was gone, dug away and used to fill in the Collect. Why did they do it? Because land was money. The city was expanding north, and hills were in the way. They flattened the geography of Manhattan with the same ruthlessness they would later use to build skyward. Now, let's talk about who lived here. It was a stratified society. At the top, you had the old Dutch patroon families, the Livingstons, the Beekmans, the Stuyvesants. They lived in grand mansions along the Bowling Green, looking down at the hustle and bustle. Their wealth came from land and trade. But a new class was rising, the entrepreneurs, men like John Jacob Astor. Astor arrived in New York in 1784 with almost nothing. By 1800, he was already a force in the fur trade. He understood something the old Dutch families didn't. The future wasn't in preserving the past, it was in buying the future. Astor was buying up land north of the city, land that seemed worthless because it was so far away. He bought farmland, rocky pastures and swamps. People laughed at him for paying good money for a farm where wolves still howled at night. But Astor wasn't buying farms, he was buying streets. He knew the grid was coming. He knew that one day that cow pasture would be a corner lot on Broadway. This was the first real estate mogul, and he was betting on the obliteration of the pastoral city. We have to pause and look at the architecture. In 1800, New York was a city of gabled roofs and Flemish-style brick houses, remnants of its Dutch origins. But the British influence was taking over. The new fashion was the federal style, neat, symmetrical brick or wooden houses with white trim. They were elegant but simple. If you wanted to see the future, you had to look at the new City Hall. Construction began in 1803. It was designed to be the most beautiful building in America, with a French Renaissance exterior and a marble front. But here is the kicker. They only put marble on the front. The back was made of cheap brownstone. Why? Because they were certain the city would never grow past it. They thought the north face of City Hall would always be on the edge of civilization. They couldn't have been more wrong. This mistake sums up the psychology of New York in 1800. They knew they were growing, but they couldn't imagine the scale of it. They were building a city hall for a capital, but they still thought of it as a town, and the rest of the island. It was a place of country estates. Imagine the area that is now Soho in Greenwich Village. It was rolling countryside. The rich had their summer villas there, surrounded by orchards and manicured lawns, to escape the yellow fever outbreaks that plagued the crowded downtown. The road to Greenwich was a rustic lane where you could get robbed by highwaymen or chased by wild pigs. That road is now Greenwich Avenue and 14th Street. It was a rural retreat. In 1800, the idea that this area would one day be the center of the bohemian art world was as fantastical as a trip to the moon, but the most profound transformation was happening in the minds of the people. The American Revolution was less than 20 years in the past. The city had been occupied by the British for most of the war. Many of the buildings were still scarred by the Great Fire of 1776 that had destroyed a quarter of the town. This was a city rebuilding itself, literally, from the ashes. There was a sense of optimism, a belief in the new republic, but also a deep anxiety. Could this experiment work? Could a city based on trade and democracy survive the rivalries of Europe? This anxiety was channeled into an almost frantic energy. Newspapers proliferated. Coffee houses buzzed with arguments about politics and shipping rates. It was a city where fortunes could be made or lost in a single voyage of a ship. It was volatile, unpredictable, and absolutely alive. And then, on the horizon, a threat appeared that would force the city to evolve again. The Napoleonic Wars were raging in Europe. Both Britain and France began seizing American ships. Trade, the lifeblood of the city, was being choked off. The city was about to face its first major depression. The bustling docks would go quiet. The coffee houses would empty. The experiment seemed on the verge of collapse. But from that crisis, a solution would emerge. The embargo on foreign trade forced New Yorkers to look inward. If they couldn't trade with the world, they would have to conquer their own continent. This desperation planted the seed for the single most important project in the city's history, the Erie Canal. When that canal opened in 1825, it connected the Great Lakes to the Hudson River. Goods that once had to travel overland from the Midwest could now flow directly into New York's harbor. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The population doubled, then tripled. The quiet pastoral hills of 1800 were swallowed by a tidal wave of immigrants and commerce. The gentlemen's farms became tenement slums. The rural retreats of Greenwich became a crowded suburb. The city of 60,000 souls became, in just a few decades, the second largest city in the British Empire and the largest in the Western Hemisphere. So, next time you are stuck in traffic on Canal Street or walking through the labyrinth of the financial district, remember, you are not just walking on pavement. You are walking on buried hills. You are walking over a filled-in lake where people once ice skated. You are walking through the ghost of a small, ambitious, muddy town that dared to dream it could become the center of the world. And that dream, born in the mud and chaos of 1800, is the foundation of everything you see today.